Thank you, and good afternoon. It's such an honor to be here. Today, of course, we're gathered to pay tribute and to recognize women who make a difference. But you'll note that we started with young women whose essays brought them here this afternoon. Their stories relatively short. Angela, whose takeaway from her own mother was, no matter how big the problem, never give up. Selena, who said her mother taught her to be strong and that she too could be a survivor just by watching her mother survive her battle with breast cancer. Stevelina Alicia, whose grandmother told her that she needed to put the needs of others before her own and instilled kindness and good values. And I think here is the takeaway that we've all seen, which is young women don't take from the lessons of their mother, well, this is what she bought me, these are the trips she took with me. They take away the example that these women provided in their lives. And I think we need to ask ourselves, how do we also become these kinds of role models? How can we make that kind of change, not just in the lives of our daughters and our sons, but in the people around us? As you well know, the United Way often focuses on poverty. Poverty can be a temporary condition. Poverty can be fought, and we can win. So today I'm here to really congratulate the honorees. The work that you've done as you came up to give your brief remarks is obviously amazing. Yvette, I had no idea there were Latinas in Alaska, really. But my job today is to not only challenge you to think about what women can do, but also to remind you how critical it is that we all do something. I want to tell you the story briefly about my mother. My parents came to this country in the late 1950s. My mother was desperately poor, Black and Cuban. My father, middle class and white and from Australia. And they met at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, where they both were working. My dad was working on his PhD. My mother was working in the chemistry department. And they met because they both used to attend daily mass. My father had a car, so he would drive. And he'd pass by my mother, who would walk. And every single day, he would offer her a ride, which meant, as I often have to tell college students, leaning over and winding down the window. This was before power windows. That was a lot of commitment already. And every single day, my father truly would ask my mother, would you like a ride? And my mother would say, no, thank you, because you didn't take a ride from a man you didn't know well. I was like, really? Even to church? Are you going to sit next? But I digress. Every day, would you like a ride? Every day, no thank you. And then one day, she said, yes, I would like a ride. And they made a date to go on a date, except that it was Baltimore, Maryland in 1958. So every single restaurant they went to would not serve them together. They said to my father, you can come in, but you certainly cannot sit together in this restaurant. And so after being turned away from restaurant after restaurant, my mother brought my father back to her apartment, and she's an amazing cook of Cuban food, and so she made him dinner. And the entire point of her story for me and my 3 sisters and my 2 brothers was, girls, if you can cook, you could get a man, truly. I like to say, I can't make it, but I can make it happen in about 20 minutes. We took greater lessons from their story. My parents decided to get married at the end of 1958, but then in the state of Maryland and 16 other states in the Union, interracial marriage was illegal. And so they got in their car and they drove to Washington, D.C., and they got hitched. And then they drove back to Baltimore, Maryland, and lived illegally. And when their friends would tell them, whatever you do, don't have children, because biracial children will not fit anywhere in this world, well, let me put it this way. I'm one of 6. My parents were terrible listeners every step of the way because they knew that America meant opportunity. And they knew that America was a place where things could happen. And when I would ask my mother, she would tell me about how people in Maryland would spit on them as a couple as they walked down the street. And I'd say, how did you take that? And she'd say, oh, Lovey, because she calls me Lovey, Lovey. We knew America was better than that. And we had to be part of changing it. It was a great lesson to learn. My parents made us value education and value the idea that what you were born into was permanent, that where you were could change like that. My mother was a living example of someone who came in at a poverty level and within one generation had moved to a solidly middle-class existence. And so I guess from their stories we took a greater lesson, which was set out to lead the life you want to lead. Be an example, because more than talking about your choices, people will look to see what choices you actually made. For example, I remember my sister Estella, who was a couple of years ahead of me at Harvard, and she was majoring in physics. And I remember she used to tell me the stories about how she was told to drop her major. And I'd say, oh, you get subtle pressure. She said, no, my advisor would call me in the dorm room and say, you should drop your major. Girls don't do well in science. Minorities don't do well in math. She went on to get her degree at Harvard in physics, and then went on to get her master's in astrophysics, and then her MD, and then her PhD in medicine. Apparently, girls do okay in science and math. I love when people clap for her, because like, yes, I taught her everything she knows about organic chemistry. It was all me. But literally, I think what she was a living example of seeing that other people weighing in on the likelihood of your success had no actual correlation to your actual success. The only thing that mattered was how much you wanted to succeed. The only thing that mattered was how many people around you would step up and help you accomplish your goals. And I think today, if we want to make a difference, we need to have that same mindset. There are lots of reasons not to bother. We're all busy, economy's down, not enough time, way too much to do, and yet there are amazing examples every day of people who literally tackle the impossible. Some of those people are winning awards here today. Some in this room are here doing that, and they're not winning awards. I remember back in 2010 traveling to Haiti to cover the earthquake that struck Port-au-Prince, of course. And we flew into the Dominican Republic and then managed to get a chopper from the DR into Port-au-Prince. And the airport was closed because the planes had kind of landed. And as they landed, they'd run out of fuel. So there was no way for any more planes to land at the airport. It was the worst devastation, truly, I had seen. And I'd covered a lot of disasters by then. Tsunami in 2004, Katrina in 2005. And we would run into missionaries, hundreds of missionaries, who were committed to saving children, committed to running orphanages, committed to trying to rebuild Haiti, trying to figure out things like where we will get the next meal, where we will get fuel to move some of these planes off the tarmac. And I remember thinking, and forgive me because this is a sort of a brutal example, but I think it's an apt one. I remember thinking as this dump truck was going by, I was like, geez, that looks like a dump truck full of bodies. Oh my God. Oh my God. That's how bad it was. That's how bad it was. And I remember driving down the street, and we saw all these vehicles stop in front of a bank, and they had one of those ramrods, and they took it out, and they started ramming their way into the bank. And I thought, oh my God, there's a robbery happening in front of us. We pulled over, started to shoot. It was the UN. The only way to secure the money in the country was to break into the banks and steal the safes out of the banks, throw them in the back of a UN tanker, and bring it out. The chaos was unimaginable. And I used to ask the missionaries, who would tell me, we have enough food for 2 days, we have enough food for 1 day, we're running out of food. We have 58 children and absolutely no food. We have 158 children and absolutely no water. We have 25 infants living in a truck, as we discovered in one of our stories, and we feed them milk because even though we know it makes them sick, we have nothing else to feed them. So we're in this cycle of feeding them milk, they get sick, we feed them more milk, they get sick. And they knew they were going to die. And I would say, how do you commit? How do you commit to doing something that is impossible? How do you commit to making change when there is absolutely no light at the end of the tunnel? I asked a woman who was a missionary who was working to help orphans. We were actually shooting a documentary on the Haitian orphans. So there were something like 450,000 orphans in Haiti. And she said to me this, looked at me almost like I was plain stupid. And she said, well, you know, it's the starfish story. I was like, what's the starfish story? She said, you know, the starfish story. A boy's walking down the beach. The tide's gone out and stranded all the starfish along the beach. And so he starts picking up starfish and chucking them back into the water. And a man comes up to him and says, "What are you doing? Do you not see? There are millions of starfish. The beach goes on for miles. You will absolutely not be able to pick up these starfish and make a difference." And the boy picks up a starfish and says, "Well, I guess it matters to this one," and chucks it in. And every single time I'd ask a missionary or someone who was in a country trying to do the impossible, "Why are you doing it? How do you continue to toil when there's no guarantee that it's going to work?" And they'd say, "Do you know the starfish story?" And I'd say, no, tell me the starfish story. And they'd tell me their version of the starfish story. And what I love about that story is it applies to all of us. It is about gathering those starfish and committing to make change. It is actually not about the light at the end of the tunnel. It is about committing to your community and deciding that those 1, 2, 5, 12, 15 starfish are important and relevant, and you will make a difference in their lives, and you will chuck them in. And what you hope to do is, by your example, inspire the people around you to also pick a section of the beach and pick up some starfish and chuck them back in as well. And if you're really good at inspiring people, maybe you can fill the beach with people who've decided to grab a couple of starfish and also commit to chucking them back in at the light at the end of the tunnel is really not what is at issue. My husband and I started our little foundation, the Soledad O'Brien Brad Raymond Foundation, with one girl. I was asked to, after Hurricane Katrina, to commit to paying her high school tuition at a time when high schools and schools really weren't back in New Orleans. And it's grown to nearly a dozen. We're on a path to get to. We want to limit it to 20 young women who are hardworking and who are ambitious and deserve support. Because we know that when we change the lives of young women, they too will make change in their lives and the people around them. Some need tuition, some need help with daycare for their kids. All need amazing mentors. And it's all about making that small change for one, committing to one, chucking that one in. Of course, when you talk about actual people, sometimes chucking that in means dragging, pushing. Our first graduate was a young woman named Sheba Turk. She graduated from the University of New Orleans, and when she graduated, her mother and father both enrolled and are freshmen. You cannot change the outcome of a natural disaster. You cannot necessarily change the way a story has gone, but you can commit to changing people's lives. We absolutely, positively can do it. And it literally is as simple as committing to grabbing a starfish and committing to chuck it back in the water and committing to inspire a couple of other people around you to do the same. Today, I encourage you to remember you have a voice. And in this room, you have powerful voices. Not everybody does. Not everybody does. Please use it. There's a great quote that is said to be from Dante, and it's said to be the favorite quote of President Kennedy. It goes like this. The darkest places in hell, it's Dante, the darkest places in hell are reserved, he had a lot of hell on his mind. The darkest places in hell are reserved for those who in times of great moral crisis maintain their neutrality. There's nothing worse than doing nothing and saying nothing when your voice is needed. Nothing worse than being the perpetrator of something bad is less bad than being the person who stands by and given the opportunity to jump in and help out. Says, "Oh, not me, not today. Oh, so busy." As our honorees have shown us today, and as the young women who introduced them have shown us today, our voices are needed, and our actions are needed even more, because it is that people remember. I would encourage you then to speak loudly and act loudly, because it truly matters. Thank you very much.